Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, although today we're not going to be analyzing body language, we're just going to be doing an updated psychological profile of Rex Heuermann. I previously did a body language analysis of Rex Heuermann during his interview as an architect, but today we're going to be talking a lot more about the psychological aspects of Rex Heuermann, the similarities he may share with other serial killers, and much more. Before we get started, I do want to remind you he has not been found guilty of any crimes yet. He is a suspect. It's alleged that he murdered 3 women and possibly more. But at this point, there has been no trial. He has not been found guilty in a court of law. And everything I talk about today are my opinions based on publicly available information. And I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. This video is really cut up into 3 major components. First, we're going to be looking at ways that Rex Heuermann is similar to 2 very well-known serial killers. Second, we're going to be looking at the importance of the psychology of using burlap for his victims. And third, we're going to be generally looking at the psychology of Rex Heuermann. As we've been seeing more information come out, there are really 2 serial killers that seem to share a lot of characteristics with Rex Heuermann. One of those is Dennis Rader, otherwise known as BTK. The other is Ed Kemper. So let's look at some of the parallels that Rex Heuermann's case has with Dennis Rader. One is the type of dual lives that they lead. Now, all serial killers have to lead dual lives to some extent to not get caught, but Dennis Rader was a family man. He worked in his church. He was a Boy Scout leader. Heuermann has been a successful architect, a husband, and a father. A late start to serial killing. Dennis Rader committed his first murder at 29 years old, and allegedly, if Rex Heuermann did indeed kill anybody, it would have been in his late 30s or early 40s if these are his only victims. That being said, serial killers oftentimes start younger. So I presume law enforcement is going to be aggressively pursuing the possibility that there are victims that predate the Gilgo Beach murders. Organized killers. They're both generally considered organized. Dennis Rader was known for being meticulous and organized, and Rex Heuermann is seen very much the same way, despite the fact there may have been some evidence found on the tape of some of the victims. A non-criminal background. The overwhelming majority of serial killers have some crime history in their background. Not universally, but many do. And similarly to Dennis Rader, Rex Heuermann does not have a criminal background that we know of. Geographical stability. Both Rader and Heuermann, if he in fact did commit these murders, both did it near their own communities. This indicates a strong comfort and familiarity with their hunting grounds. Let's take a minute to watch Dennis Rader talk during an interview so you can get a feel for what he's like, so you can get a better understanding of how he would come across interpersonally.
I started working out this fantasy in my mind, and once that person become a fantasy, I could just loop it over. I'd lay in bed at night thinking about this person, the events and how it's going to happen, and it became a real, almost like a picture show. You know, I wanted to go ahead and produce it, direct it, and go through with it, no matter what the costs were and the consequences. It was going to happen one way or another.
So when you think about that obsessive nature, the more we found out about Rex Heuermann, when he's called victims, when he's Googled their names over and over again, when he has done things that actually seem somewhat obsessive, there may be more psychologically that is in fact overlapping with BTK than we even know at this point. The other serial killer that stood out was Edmund Kemper, otherwise known as the co-ed killer. He killed a number of women in the early 70s here in the U.S., and he went on to confess his crimes and actually ask for the death penalty, which he was not given. So let's talk about some of the ways that Edmund Kemper and Rex Heuermann may in fact also have overlapping characteristics. Now, one of them is that Edmund Kemper is a very large man. I believe he's 6'9". Rex Heuermann is also a very tall and very large man. They both share this large physical stature. Now, that is not going to imply that people that are large commit killings, but it's an interesting point that they are in fact so similar, along with some of these other similarities. They're both known for being quite intelligent. They're both known for being intellectual. If you listen to Edmund Kemper speak, which we're going to do in just a minute, you can tell that he is someone with an above-average intelligence. In addition to that, Rex Heuermann is also thought to likely have an above-average intelligence. Both had mothers with a dominating personality. According to criminologist Scott Bond, Heuermann's mother was domineering and controlling. This may have contributed to his own pathology. This may have been why he chose women as his victims. They both had strong ties to their home. Kemper murdered 2 people in his home. In addition, it's suspected that if Heuermann did in fact commit these murders, he may have in fact committed them in his own house. That's a fact that is still unknown, and it's one that we're going to continue to keep an eye on, and we'll talk about more if we find out more about that. But it's possible and suspected that that may in fact be what happened. In addition, I do want you to keep in mind that Heuermann lived in his childhood home. He bought it from his mother. He continued to work in the workshop that his father had. So this demonstrates that Heuermann likely had a very strong attachment to the past, maybe even so much that he struggled to move forward in life. So now let's watch Ed Kemper talk for a few minutes about some of his own experiences.
The person was living a cover life that was wrapped around doing those crimes, and which couldn't be very realistic. Someone doesn't live their life to murder people. Their life was not set for that from birth. From my point of view, what I saw was there was a great hole in my life. There was a lot missing from my life, and it didn't necessarily mean feelings. It meant...
Now this is interesting. Typically we think of people that experience the types of psychopathy that someone like Ed Kemper or some of the other people we've talked about have. We tend to think of them as not having a lot of insight, but right now he's talking about his own experiences, which is fairly unusual, but he's also a very intelligent guy. And that's why I thought it would be interesting to hear him talk about this. So let's watch a little bit more. Let's keep going.
I had walled off this emptiness in my life, okay? I had an upbringing that was, some have called dysfunctional, okay? Parents divorced when I was young. My mother started drinking heavily. She was working to raise 3 kids. We were not being cooperative about it. She drank more. She punished us harder, probably out of desperation. So character sets were being developed at that point. Rather than me going to Boy Scouts and getting achievement badges, I was not going to Boy Scouts and not getting achievement badges. I was finding devious ways to get around the rules of the home. Because the whole home life, I watched it deteriorate from what typical kids on the block were doing.
So listening to Ed Kemper talk, you might not peg him for somebody that committed the heinous acts that he did. And that's another thing that is similar with Rex Heuermann, is that he's able to speak naturally. He's able to connect with people. Now, Rex Heuermann, I know some people didn't get such a great vibe from him. Some people have said he was weird and strange and all these things. But professionally, it sounds like generally he was able to connect with people when he wanted to. And this is very similar to Ed Kemper. He tries to come across as likable. He talks about different stories where he would connect with his attorneys or try to joke around with people and all of these things. It's fairly interesting to watch him talk about this stuff because he can come across as a fairly normal guy, and this is what we see with people that live dual lives. BTK, Ed Kemper, potentially Rex Heuermann. These are all people that are able to come across fairly naturally and come across as friendly when they want to. So now we're going to take just a minute to talk about the psychology of why someone would use burlap in these serial murders. Now, the first and most obvious is probably that it's practical. It's a common resource. It's cheap. You could carry something and transport something that's in burlap, and someone might not obviously think that it's a person right away. So there is a certain practical aspect for why someone would use that, and it's available in large quantities. But I believe there is genuine significance in his victim choice and his use of burlap. He chose women that were escorts, and I believe that he saw them as objects. I believe the murderer sees, whether it was Rex Heuermann or somebody else, I believe this murderer sees people as objects. That's one thing that we know about psychopaths. They see people as literal objects. And that's something I discuss with people because I don't think that most folks truly understand how literal I'm being when I say that a psychopath sees a person as an object. They are a thing. For those of us that are not psychopaths, it's very hard for us to connect with the idea or the principle that someone genuinely sees other people as not human beings. They are just a tool to get a need met. But in a very real way, that's exactly what psychopaths are. They see people as tools to get needs met, not as another living person, not as a being that matters, but as an object. So wrapping up his victims in burlap, in a lot of ways, is probably very representative, whether it's conscious or not, of how he feels about these people, because he doesn't see them as humans. He sees them as objects. And the third would be a psychological signature. Now, many serial killers oftentimes have their own little signatures, like the smiley face killer, who would draw a smiley face on notes, or many others who have their own little distorted, bizarre signatures that they leave behind. And the burlap may in fact have been some way that he wanted his victims to be identifiable, to make sure that it was known who he had killed. And the reason that killers do this is it fulfills a psychological need above and beyond the killing. It attaches them to the way that people are talking about the crimes. Allegedly, there's an escort or a former escort who's talked about Rex Heuermann as being one of her clients at the time and asked specifically about these killings, asked specifically what she knew about it or if she worried about these killings or if she'd heard of them, and that he apparently talked about them at length with her. And this also shows some desire to see his handiwork, see the impact it has, see the fear it gives people. So oftentimes for serial killers, it goes beyond bloodlust. They want to be connected to certain crimes. They want to have a signature or a trademark. And so the burlap in some ways did that for him. Here are 5 psychological or behavioral traits that Rex Heuermann may in fact have that stand out that I want us to keep in mind as we continue to do further analysis. 1 is control and domination. In his public life, as an architect, he was reportedly somewhat controlling and dominating. And that's also something that we've seen in the alleged murders, that he in fact chose vulnerable victims that he was able to control and dominate. This is a common trait seen among serial killers. 2 is superiority and manipulation. He was oftentimes cited as acting superior to others in his public life. He would say things such as, quote, "I'm an expert, you're lucky to have me." He also seemed to think he could outsmart law enforcement, calling victims' families, harassing them, and in fact getting involved in ways that put him at risk. Obsession and ritual. All of the victims were disposed of in the same way, or at least the victims that we know of. In addition to that, he was known for Googling and obsessing over victims' families if in fact he actually committed these murders. Lack of empathy. It seems that his controlling nature was evident to some others. He was known as being somewhat introverted and a little strange according to other people, and it was difficult for some people to connect with him. It seems that as an architect and in his public life, at times he was able to get along with and connect with people and be nice to others. And for other people, such as one of his neighbors, they've described him as being quite strange and acting quite aloof and difficult. And lastly, the ability to compartmentalize. People like BTK and others have demonstrated a very strong ability to do this, and it's very possible Rex Heuermann was able to do this as well. He was able to lead a relatively normal life. The ability to switch off emotions is something that serial killers are oftentimes capable of doing. Hopefully, all of this is helping you better build a profile in your own mind moving forward. Keep in mind, there's still plenty of evidence to come out. Also keep in mind a trial has not yet happened, and these are my own opinions and ideas based on publicly available information. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or thoughts or ideas yourself, please comment below. I always love to read what people have to say about this. In addition to that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.